Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Common Sense with Dr. Ben Carson. I'm your host, Ben Carson. And Ronald Reagan once said, those who say that we're in a time where there are no heroes just don't know where to look. Well, look no further than today's podcast. I'm honored to have today's guest on the show, particularly on March the 25th, which happens to be Medal of Honor Day. The Medal of Honor is the United States' highest award for military valor. It's given to those who have shown exceptional bravery, sacrifice, integrity, and a deep love for our country. And we should honor all of these heroes every day. But on this day, I want to take the opportunity to bring public awareness and gratitude for the extreme sacrifice of the individuals who've won this honor. And we're lucky to have Medal of Honor recipient Drew Dix on the show today. Drew, thank you so much for what you've done for the country, for the example you've been, and for joining us today.
Well, and thank you for the invitation to be here. It's certainly my pleasure.
Well, I encourage everyone to read the full citation of Drew's Medal of Honor. You can find it online at the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, among numerous other places. And you can also find his story in his own words as part of the video library. And his story was also chronicled on the Beyond the Medal of Honor documentary. Now, I know, Drew, that you're a humble person and you don't really like to talk so much about yourself, but you've dedicated your life to public service and to lifting others up. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk about what kind of prepared you for this. Did you know you wanted to enlist in the military early on? And did you anticipate being deployed to Vietnam?
Oh, Dr. Carson, when I was a young man at about 17, actually I was a young boy, but it didn't take me long to grow up in the military. But I was raised in a town of hardworking people, and I had the greatest respect for those that I was raised with and my family. And I think it was a natural thing for me to want to be in the military and follow the footsteps of those that served before me. So that's what drove me to being in the military. But I had this idea that I wanted to be in special forces. I heard something about special forces. They didn't call them Green Berets in those days. But I wanted to be part of the best, and I wanted to be tough. And I didn't realize that you had to be 21, and I was 17. So I had to cool my heels in the 82nd Airborne Division for about 4 years before I was eligible to get in special forces.
Well, when you went in there, it was a highly classified project. What were you asked to do?
Well, when I went into special forces, the training is very unique. It was to do things that other people wouldn't do or couldn't do in other parts of the world. And it was expected that you were just part of this legacy of those that were willing to make those kinds of sacrifices. When I was first given this assignment, special assignment in Vietnam, I had no idea what it was going to be. But you volunteer to go to special forces, that means you volunteer for everything they give you.
And you had to work with people from other cultures and other languages too, didn't you?
I did, and the Army Special Forces is area-oriented, the units. So you prepare yourself for assignments in that part of the world. And I had just completed Spanish language school because my area was Central America, but the war in Vietnam was getting pretty hot and heavy, and we had casualties. And of course, I went right to Vietnam with my Spanish language skills, and was assigned to organize, train, and lead Cambodians, Vietnamese, and Chinese, ethnic Chinese. So my skills were tested from the very beginning.
Yeah, I imagine there were probably some times when you were the lone American in these situations.
Well, that's true. The job was highly classified. Deniability was important in those days, and I was the only American. And knowing that my respect for the indigenous people, the ones that were willing to fight for their country, we had an immediate self respect for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just part of the deal, and I ended up being very close to some of those that I served with.
Well, you know, your specific honor came from some of the actions you did. I think it's pronounced Chowdock. Is that
Chowduck, exactly.
okay? That was during the Tet Offensive. Uh, what was happening in the war during that time?
Well, in 1968 was probably the hottest year for the war for the U.S. 67, 68, 69, but 68 was the peak, and the Tet Offensive was brewing, and we didn't know it as the U.S. didn't really realize there was going to be an offensive. It was the Tet holidays. It comes every year, and the war was pretty hot and heavy. So both sides were looking for a time for a little bit of a ceasefire, and it was a masterful job that the enemy did. It infiltrated practically I think it were 42 of the 44 provinces in Vietnam, totally infiltrated them, and it was kind of done under the 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 cover of people moving around from villages to the province to celebrate. And my business was reconnaissance, and I was out on a patrol across the border into Cambodia, and Chao Phu and Chao Duc province is only right on. It was right on the border, and there wasn't much going on. And I thought that was pretty strange because we always had enemy activity that we could find over there, and there was nothing. And I came back and sent the message out that didn't pick up any prisoners. That was my main job, was getting prisoners. And I needed to go out and look one more time. And the ceasefire had just, the ceasefire had just been initiated. And I said, I'm going to go out on a recon and just look around. I'm not going to start anything. I'm just going to see what's going on. And while we were gone, the enemy at that time had totally infiltrated Chao Duc and took it over. And of course, as it went, we fought our way back into the city to rescue those.
It's pretty amazing because you later wrote about the 56-hour battle and the rescue of River City. So many things happened during that time. You rescued American nurse Maggie Fancott. You led a small force to rescue a bunch of civilians who were trapped. You rescued 8 USAID workers who were in a building under heavy assault. Recaptured some of the strategic buildings, rescued some Filipinos who worked with the U.S., rescued the deputy province commander's wife and children. I mean, it just goes on. Repelled a much larger enemy force, captured 20 prisoners, including a high-ranking North Vietnamese general. Some people say it was the highest-ranking person who was ever captured during that war. And basically, you drove the Viet Cong from Chao Duc province. I mean, how in the world did you do all of that?
Well, I had a few guys with me. So initially there was a Navy SEAL platoon that happened to be in the area and went on that initial recon. And I had 6 of my indigenous troops. And so I didn't do it alone, but I had some help. And the SEALs were with me until one of them was mortally wounded, and they had to evacuate him, and they left with him. And so we pressed on, and I ended up started off about 6 of my guys. And the reason why I didn't have any more was it was a holiday. And as the guys were in town, I guess, and they saw the success we were having, they started piling on to us, and we got up to 20 people, 20 men that really fought like gladiators. And I think when I look back on it, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for some of them. And they gave their lives. A couple of them gave their lives for me, the indigenous guys, and I have the greatest respect for them. I think one of the takeaways from all of this is when things are tough and you got to do it, and you feel like you have the training and the ability and the desire to do it, you do it, and you can get her done. And the other thing is we had a lot more to shoot at than they did.
Yeah. But when you look back on it, sometimes with the retrospective scope, does it amaze you what you actually were able to accomplish?
Well, I look back on it, it's pretty clear. It's indelibly printed in my brain about the sequence of events and why I was able to just make it through there. But 56 hours is a long time, and we weren't sure what the outcome was going to be. But when I was able to snatch that one guy, Sao Bay, who was the highest ranking Viet Cong that had been captured in the war at that time, by that time, it started to turn. And you take advantage of the opportunity and you go for it. And we had him, and we knew what their mission was.
Now, were you afraid of dying at all? I mean, what kind of mindset does it take to do what you did?
Well, I think a lot of people are afraid of dying, but it didn't enter my mind at the time. Not at all. It got pretty dicey at a couple times, but it was like, am I going to get through this part of the mission to get to my next objective more than just dying? It just didn't enter my mind. I've been on a couple operations after that where it maybe came a little bit closer to meeting my maker, but at that time it wasn't a factor.
But what was going on at Chok Da was really part of a larger Viet Cong mission. Did you know that at the time?
Well, at that time, if communication's a little bit different than it is now, and we had no idea what was happening in the rest of the country. Not at all. We just knew that we couldn't make any communications out of the city. Nobody was answering the phone. So when I knew something had to be countrywide, so when I got Sao Bay, that was a stroke of luck because we might get an idea what the overall objective of the Viet Cong was and the North Vietnamese. But it was just when you think about the magnitude of this effort that the communists put together, everything they had, they contributed to this event, and they lost. They lost that battle in the country. And it's unfortunate that we won that and we didn't give the troops the victory that they deserve on that, because that war was won right then.
Well, you were dramatically outnumbered. I mean, it's just hard to imagine how you coordinated your efforts in such a way to be victorious in a situation like that.
Well, we didn't have anybody to coordinate with. There was no communications out of the city. And at that, initially, I didn't know how many enemy we had. We later found out it was up to about 600, two Viet Cong battalions, the 510th and 512th, and up to 20 of us, no more than 20 ever. And, you know, one of the successes we had was that every time we took an objective, I left somebody on that objective, usually somebody wounded that couldn't go with us, but they had no choice but to survive and stay there because I wanted to occupy a piece of ground that we left. Kind of like the Vietnam War, you fight it, you take it, and you leave it. Wasn't going to do that there because we would be leaving people behind us as we proceeded forward.
Well, you were only 23 years old at that point. I mean, your brain wasn't even fully developed by that time. I mean, it's just amazing. What goes through your mind at a time like that? Are you thinking about home, getting back home to mom's home cooking? I mean, what kind of goes through your mind when you're just under fierce attack like that?
You know, when I went to Special Forces training, it was from the very beginning. Our lineage began with the OSS in Burma, and I had the good fortune of working and receiving training from some of those guys, and it was just in my mind that the respect that I got from them working in the hardships that they worked, that it was my turn and I wasn't going to let them down. And that's just what you do. I think it's kind of part of the warrior culture. Unfortunately, we need warriors in this world today because they're bad people. But so I say the warrior culture in a positive sense, that we have to be willing to make those sacrifices to keep our legacy, our way of life, and those that died before us, we have to establish and maintain their legacy. And they're doing it now for us.
Well, true words were never spoken. Now, what impact did receiving the Medal of Honor have on your life?
Well, to say it didn't affect me would be just flat untrue. It affected me. Initially, going back to the unit, there's a lot of expectations. So it's a difficult transition to be a normal Special Forces soldier, and then one that wanted to be a normal Special Forces soldier, but not allowed to be because of the recognition. So I learned right off that you use the good experiences that you had to build yourself and for the future, not live on the past. Because living in the past is kind of like a dead end. Should never live on the past. Use that to build on. And so when I got out of the Army in 1982, I stayed in the government service and did some other work with different folk. But it wasn't until I retired in later and started the Center for American Values in Pueblo. That's what the Medal of Honor did for me. It gave me a mouthpiece to do some things and to recognize that we have to do more to understand what those before us did.
Have you heard from any of the people that you saved? Have you ever run into any of them or heard?
Yes, one of my good friends is Jim Monroe. He's at the center, there's a portrait of all of us when they started taking portraits of Medal of Honor recipients. And my portrait, I didn't want just to me. I wanted those that were with me. And one of them was Jim Monroe, who I worked for at the time. And also one of the Chinese guys, Nego. And the nurse, Maggie, was one of the people I rescued. But I wrote just a few of them. Now, if you look back on that battle, there weren't many of us in Chowda. I was the only American, other than Jim Monroe at the Embassy House, and the few SEALs at the time, and I run into them periodically. But it wasn't a large military unit, so I don't see many of them. But in the business, when you stay in unconventional warfare business, those that were on the periphery of what we were doing, I run into all the time. And that's it's a life, and if you weren't able to do that, it keeps you going to know that others made sacrifices along with you. Keeps your head from getting too big.
Well, you mentioned earlier the Center for American Values. We seem to be at a time in our country when our values are going by the wayside. And, our country went from a bunch of ragtag militiamen to the pinnacle of the world in record time. And it really wasn't a coincidence. It was really because of the values. So, how did you come about creating this center, and what is its mission?
Well, the center is very special to me, and it's becoming very special to a lot of people. And I hope you can come to see it someday. I want to be
I
here when you
love
come. I know you'll love it. Um, the the center is a place. Now, we got to fix more than just what the people that come through the door, but we're a center, and we're broadcasting out to the youth, and the youth are getting a bad rap. It's their parents right now that need to be educating the youth. And we're drilling down on that, and we're doing remote learning, remote teaching, just exposure to what these men have done. And I make it real clear, especially when we're talking to the youth, that you don't have to be in the military or have a Medal of Honor to be recognized.
Right.
We use the example of these men in bad times making a difference that either saved people and their life became enriched for that. So we make it real clear that in anything you do, when times are tough, you can move forward and give somebody a break. It will come back to you. And that's what we need to get back to this country. We need to get this idea that we're all in it together. We're not individuals. We went a little overboard on the individuality of living, and you all have the right to do this, of course. But what gave us that right is the freedoms that this country gives us, has provided for us, the opportunity to work hard for a living, for our families.
Well, what's going on in Pueblo, Colorado? Is there something in the water? Because you have more Medal of Honor winners than any place. You're tied with Holland, Michigan, but those two places. I mean, is there something about the culture there? What is it?
Well, I said it earlier that what inspired me was that Pueblo was a typical hardworking steel town. There were hardworking people in both parties. And I don't want to I'm not into politics, but now you hate each other if you just don't, if there's one little shred of what you don't believe in, you hate the other one. And we didn't have that. We were all about working hard and speaking up to get who you wanted to represent you in local office or whatever. But when the medal was being awarded to Jerry Murphy, it was said, "What is something in the water?" And when I was a kid, I really didn't know who Jerry Murphy, Carl Sitter, Bill Crawford were. I delivered newspapers up this very long road that seemed like it was uphill both ways, called Jerry Murphy Road. And when I came back from Vietnam and I met Jerry, Carl, and Bill Crawford, it just kind of put the burden on my shoulders that I'm now part of them and what that really means. And that we were all alive together at one time. That is what's unique about the home heroes.
Yeah, but it's so important that you're pushing appropriate values. But do you think the young people today have it harder than in the past? The things that they're exposed to. Some people say everything is the same. Nothing has really changed. What do you think?
I like I said earlier, the young people need to be shown examples, and it's usually the parents. And if the parents are hardworking, it's going to it's going to rub off on the kids. But if the parents aren't, then how can the kids pick up on it unless
Exactly.
it's something that someone else tells them? And one of the missions of the centers is not to tell people what to think, but how to think. And that's what folks should be doing. It's the parents that set the example. And we need to get that back into the system.
Now, are there some in-person classes as well as virtual classes at the center?
Oh, we have classes all the time. People come through the kids come through the center, and when I'm here and I see buses unload and the kids are walking and they're doing what the kids do, but when they come through the door, it's almost like even if they're 6, 7, 8 years old, it's a hush. It's quiet, and they look at all of these portraits around here. And it resonated with me one time because I always thought kids are more visual, right? And I think that's what people say. But there's quotes by every one of these individuals, and they were looking at that. And that's why we came up with this quote book that is the quotes of the Medal of Honor recipients that are here. And we take this information and broadcast it out, on never leaving the fact this is the center, but it's a center that can reach out across the country.
Well, what do you think, looking at all those pictures? I think there's 63 of you that are still alive, which is
63, that's correct.
I don't think people realize how rare you are, but I hope you live for a very long time. But what are some of the qualities and values that you think that all Medal of Honor winners share?
Well, the Medal of Honor recipients, that's a unique question, because being a part of this society since 1969, and when there was almost 400, from World War I, Spanish-American War, Boxer Rebellion, Nicaragua campaign, and those, they all were willing to make a sacrifice for someone else. That's what the characteristics of the Medal of Honor is risking your life to save someone else. And some were farmers, some probably never had a pair of shoes until they were drafted and went in World War II or somewhere. And no rank in our organization. We've had 2 commandants of the Marine Corps, a 4-star general, Eddie Rickenbacker, Jimmy Doolittle, no rank. And I have to tell this little bit of a story, because Medal of Honor recipients get an invitation to all inaugurals, nonpartisan. They do. And so I didn't know all these recipients, but I'm a 23-year-old sergeant. And my escort from the White House said, "Hey, you're going to go over to Alexandria, Virginia, where your buddies are." I'm thinking, oh, some of my special forces guys will be there. Well, I showed up, and it's all these Medal of Honor recipients getting ready to go to the inaugural on the 20th. I was there on the 16th to receive the medal from President Johnson. And I looked around and said, my buddies, I mean, these guys are legends. And so Luther Skaggs, the president of the society, then said, when the limo comes up, you jump in and it'll take you where you need to go. So because he recognized I was had that 1,000-meter stare, and wasn't sure what's going on. And I get in this limo, and there are 2 guys talking like aviators do. They stopped. They were on each side of the back seat and didn't move. But I got in the middle. And one of them stuck it out his hand and says, "I'm Eddie Rickenbacker, and this is Jimmy Doolittle." Both noted aviators. And can you imagine that? And I'm from the era where I knew who they were, and I didn't know what to say. And these are my buddies. And so they're very notable people. I think Eddie Rickenbacker might have been president of Eastern Airlines at the time in addition to his claim. And they treated us all the same.
Yeah.
And that's what's very unique about it.
It reminds you of the early days of our country when the small communities were isolated and everybody took care of each other. And that's how they survived and they thrived. If it was harvest time and somebody got injured, everybody else harvested their crops. No questions asked. And it really didn't matter what your religion was or what your politics were. And it seems to me like that's perhaps the greatest threat to our nation right now is the divisiveness on every characteristic, race, age, income, gender, political affiliation, religion, just driving wedges and destroying the harmony that was so important to our country. I hope people heard what you said. That's so vitally important. And we're back with our final segment on common sense. Medal of Honor winner Drew Dix. Drew, are there some misconceptions about the Vietnamese War that people today have, or have people's perceptions changed over the years?
I think the perception has changed a lot. I think the Vietnamese are one of our, as a nation, are one of our biggest supporters. Mm-hmm. They knew that we could have won that war militarily. We just weren't given the victory. But they admired us. And even on the battlefield, when things are, it gets pretty serious when someone's trying to kill you and you're trying to kill them. Mm-hmm. But there's also a respect that grows there. And I'm thankful that the Vietnamese are becoming our friends, because I remember shortly after the Vietnam War when the Chinese kind of wanted to come across, make an incursion into Vietnam, and the Vietnamese sent them all running back to the country they belonged in. And they're powerful people because they have a will.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, a lot of the Vietnamese boat people that came over, refugees, they're very hardworking people. You'd see them out sweeping the grounds in front of the 7-Eleven. Then you come back later and they're pumping the gas. You come back later, they're behind the counter. You come back later, they own it. And they really didn't adopt the victim mentality. They came and they saw opportunity. And there's a real lesson there, I think, for a lot of Americans who see themselves as victims. If you think you're a victim, you are one. But if you open your eyes and you look for opportunity, it is amazing what this country has to offer. And I think to a much greater extent than most other countries. Now, did you know Colonel Roger Dolan or Captain Larry Taylor?
Roger Donlin?
Yes.
Yeah.
They were both Medal of Honor recipients during the Vietnamese War also. And they both passed away recently.
Roger Donlin was the first Medal of Honor recipient in Vietnam. We became very good friends. And he passed recently, and I'm going to go to speak at the honors that they're having at Fort Leavenworth for him on the 10th of April. So it is my pleasure to do that, my honor to do that put somebody to help present the honors that warranted for his actions. And he did so much after receiving the medal.
All of you guys are just great inspirations, condolences to their families, but I can't tell you how much you appreciate it. But what advice would you give to young people today aspiring to serve their country?
Well, it's the military has changed. And I'm a little bit concerned right now because the men and women in the military getting a bad rap, but it's some of the leadership is is quite frankly misguided. If the current flag officer didn't embrace the DEI, they wouldn't be a flag officer this day. And let's face it, there is one job for the military, and that's defend this nation and our borders. And we do it with, well, they got the recruiting problem. Something's not working. I think if they went back to what our mission was, we would have no recruiting problem. Get back to where you can be who you want to be, not what someone tells you should be. And I'm very concerned about it, and I'm not the only one. We've got to get this turned around.
Well, it's very nice the way you put that, because you're not caustic and highly inflammatory. You just state the facts. And I think a lot of people understand that and realize that, the military, 1% of our population provides the freedom for the other 99%. So, they're due great honor and great respect. But we also want them to act in a logical way because, there's a lot of things going on in the country that have infiltrated into the military. I was in Europe not too long ago talking to a bunch of Europeans, and I said, what do you think about America? And they say, I think you've lost your minds. We don't want that to creep into the military, because if it does, it will have ramifications. There's no question about that. And I hope people are listening to voices of reason like yours, because that's what will save us in a really complex world. Can you tell us how people can find the Center for American Values, and what can they do to help promote it?
The center is located in Pueblo, Colorado on the Riverwalk. The website is AmericanValuesCenter.org. You Google that, look it up, and it'll tell you what we're doing. You can even Google my name, it'll tell you the affiliation of the center. So that's the easy part. The easy part is to see what we're doing. What we need is some help to get this done. We're doing okay, but we want to get on the road, and our new educational program, unfortunately, we're going digital too, because we have to reach more people, but we do it in a way that's hands-on. We're not giving them a chance to look at this and forget about it. We're bringing in real life people that'll make a difference. And on this day, we're having a big event in Pueblo, and my good buddy, Ron Ray, Medal of Honor recipient, is coming in for that. And then in Wyoming, we're going up to Pinedale, and we're going to broadcast from there during school hours to a class there around the country at the same time. So if anybody wants to help with that concept, we're willing to accept whatever help you can give us, because the mission is more critical now. We never even thought in 2010 that we have the need that we have now. We just wanted to get the word out a little bit.
And what's the website?
AmericanValuesCenter.org.
That's pretty easy to understand. Well, Drew, I want to just thank you so much for joining us today, giving us some valuable perspective. And thank you so much for what you're doing with the Center for American Values. That's what's going to save us. That's what's going to save us, our values. That's what makes America different. We'll go down the same route as all the other superpowers have in the past if we don't cling to those values. So thank you for bringing that to our attention and being a great American.
Thank you, sir. I hope you can come and visit us.
Absolutely. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Drew Dix on a day that it was recorded, March the 25th, National Medal of Honor Day. And what a hero he is, and so many others. But I want you to pay attention to one of the things he said that was so important. That is unity. Don't let somebody be your enemy just because you have a disagreement. We have disagreements all the time. We have different experiences, different brains. It doesn't mean that we can't work together for the good of all, the common good. That was a phrase that was used very frequently by the founders of this country. Thank you for joining us in this program. Don't forget to subscribe for free to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss any episodes. Rate us, review us, tell others about us. Common sense needs to be spread. It needs to become common again, and you're a big part of that. And don't forget the cornerstone principles: faith, liberty, community, and life. See you next week.